Good day, everyone. This is co-host John Schlarbaum, here to inform you that a new companion book to the podcast is now out. Titled Music Virgin No More, I delve deeper into how my weekly charts began and why the music from the early 80s still influences the preferences of millions of listeners 45 years later. Again, the book is Music Virgin No More, a fun and easy read filled with facts about the singles, albums, and groups you still love today. Purchase your copy on Amazon for only $15, and thanks for downloading today's episode, which begins right now.
CJBK London, it's 154.
Welcome, music fans, to the Music Virgins No More podcast. Now here are your hosts, John and Jason.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 2 of the Music Virgins No More podcast. I'm John Schlarbaum.
And I'm Jason Kavanaugh.
For those new to the podcast, here's a little background about us. Mr. Kavanaugh and I have a shared admiration for Bruce Springsteen, yet we kind of disagree on the musical merits of Cheap Trick. And although there is a 20-year difference in our ages, we've remained friends for 18 plus years.
As for the show itself, it's based on John's preteen memories of top 40 music between 1980 and 1982, when sadly, he created 106 weekly music charts that he dutifully typed up on his small portable Smith Corona typewriter while alone in his childhood bedroom in southwestern Ontario.
Each podcast will dive deep into these magnificent charts and discuss the music that, in part, became the soundtrack to my life. As for the name of the podcast, Music Virgins No More, it refers both to my personal journey as a young record collector starting in the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, as well as Jason's current journey with me as he discovers music and bands he was totally unaware of before now.
For more details about John's record collecting past and his motivations for creating these music charts when he was 14 years old, an age when you'd think he'd have known better, please listen to episode number 1. As for today's episode, we're going to delve into chart number 2 for the week of August 30th, 1980. For those keeping track at home, last week's number 1 single was Queen's Play the Game, and John's number 1 group was Paul McCartney and Wings, Wings being Paul's other band, after his stint with another fairly successful group you may have heard of, the Beatles. So let's get to it, John. Were there any new entries of this week?
There were, Jason. So, a new single entered the charts at number 13. It was titled All Out of Love by the Australian English soft rock duo Air Supply, and they pushed Sir Elton John's Little Genie out of the top 15. And also over on the group charts, Meatloaf, who is a new/old musician, entered the group ratings at number 5, which is kind of a mystery to me now. I think maybe I had bought a copy of the original 1977 classic Bat Out of Hell album, and he was again one of my favorites. I'm totally lost on how he just entered number 5, but onward.
And Air Supply, was this their first soft rock hit?
Well, All Out of Love was actually their second of 5 consecutive songs that reached the top 5 in Canada and the United States. And really, these top 5 songs have kept them going for the last 45 years, as I believe they're still touring. But their breakout song was earlier in the year called Lost in Love, which is my personal favorite of theirs, if I have one, which was released in January 1980.
Did they have any other hit songs with the word love in them?
Oh, they did. They had a couple more that became hits. The first one was The One That You Love in 1981 and Making Love Out of Nothing at All in 1983, which was, coincidentally, written by Meatloaf's main songwriter Jim Steinman, favorite of mine. So there's a bit of a 6 degrees of separation connection with the two groups on this week's chart.
I found it interesting that All Out of Love's writing credits are Graham Russell, one of the 2 members of Air Supply, and Clive Davis, the legendary music producer, an executive who discovered and signed acts like Springsteen, Janis Joplin, Chicago, Billy Joel, you know the rest. Everybody. It's Clive Davis. What was his contribution?
Well, apparently, the original chorus went, I'm all out of love. I want to arrest you. However, Clive Davis thought that Americans or North American music fans wouldn't understand what that meant. So he suggested, I'm all out of love. I'm so lost without you. And boom, those 5 words, he gets a writing credit for a song that sold 1.2 million copies in the USA and Australia alone. Those 5 words. I wish I had those 5 words to add to somebody's hit song today.
You know, it's funny how many songs and bands sort of dumbed down their work for the American audience. You know, Led Zeppelin is spelt the way it is because they thought the audience would pronounce it Lead Zeppelin in the U.S.
Right, and when you think of your favorite album, Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, they spelled it the English way. So you have a U in there instead of the way Americans write. So I mean, with them, they actually stayed true to where they're originally from, even though you have Stevie and Nicky, complete Californians.
Okay, here's a little offshoot here, but you're a writer, so this is interesting. Do you know why Americans don't use the "you" in rumors and words like that?
Why?
To save money, because they used to charge by the letter in newspapers and magazines and everything. So Americans thought, well, you're going to know what I'm saying if I just drop a letter here or there, and that's how all these words got shortened, was to save money.
Very interesting. Now, see, when I write one of my novels or stories and you do a spell check, it always comes up as, this word, you should look at this word because it's spelled incorrectly. And it's always the American writing. But because I'm Canadian, I always have to go ignore once. And, I go through that all the time. So that is interesting. I did not know that fun fact, Jason.
Thanks. Yeah. Economical Americans.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's go back to Air Supply here. The other fun fact about All Out of Love is that it's known for Russell Hitchcock holding the final note for almost 16 and a half seconds. And this was the longest held record for a couple of years until, was it Sheriff? Yeah, Sheriff's song. That was over 19 seconds. He held that big note at the end. What was the name of that song? That was When I'm With You, which is a song I love. It's as cheesy as it is. It's a great song.
The one thing about When I'm With You is that it has a great backstory that we could probably do a short segment on at some point where, it was released, nobody, it was a fine little song. And then a couple of years later, a DJ found the song somewhere in the States, put it on, and it became this huge hit again. Now, you being a music, producer now with all your gizmos and gadgets and sonic trickery, you could make the last note of every song go on forever and ever and ever now, couldn't you?
I probably could. Maybe that's an episode we should do is 80s songs in Canada that might not necessarily be on your charts, but songs we should probably talk about. Like I've got the Partland Brothers I'd love to talk about. We should probably talk about this Sheriff song. So maybe that'll be a later episode. Okay, what's next? We got Meatloaf, Pete Townsend. Who's pushing who where?
Okay, so in the group charts this week, not much really happened aside from Meatloaf pushing, like you said, poor Pete Townsend down to number 6 on the group rankings. But there was a bit more movement on the singles charts, which brings us to our next weekly feature, Fastest Mover. So on my charts, I put small arrows on either side of the song name and group that had the week's biggest jump. It was like a song on its way up, just like Billboard magazine used to put, circles around numbers, calling them bullets. And here's a fun fact for you, Jason. So when Billboard or somebody, in the States said if your song was number 1 with a bullet, it actually meant it was not only the number 1 song in the country, but was unlikely to move from that position for quite a while. So you always wanted a bullet because you were moving up, but you really wanted that number 1 with a bullet because you're going to stay at number 1 for quite a while.
I had heard radio DJs when I was younger saying, this song's climbing up the charts with a bullet. I just thought it meant, shooting like a gun, like climbing the charts. But I guess there was a literal, denotation on the chart that meant with a bullet. That's really interesting. Okay, so for August 30th, 1980, the fastest mover was My Mistake by the Kingbees, a song I'd never heard until recently, moving from 10 to 7.
Now, the Kingbees had two things going for them that you'd appreciate, Jason. I think you would. First, the leader, Jamie James, was Canadian. And second, he was an avowed Buddy Holly fan. Now, in Mark Deming's review on the AllMusic website, he wrote, quote, "The American heartland was reminded of the existence of rockabilly in 1982 when the Stray Cats compilation Built for Speed finally broke the Long Island Hep Cats in the United States, but some of that credit should have gone to the Kingbees." Now, for me, this is it's a happy song with a cool beat, sort of a mix of new wave and rockabilly. It did reach number 24 in Canada and number 81 on Billboard in the States. Unfortunately, number 7 would be as high as it would go on my charts, but I still play this one 40 odd years later. So, Jason, as our resident Buddy Holly fanatic, what did you think of My Mistake? Was it a mistake? Was it my mistake to put on the chart? Go ahead.
Nice play on words there. Well, of all the 50s revival tracks that were coming out at the time, like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, the Stray Cat stuff coming a little later, like you mentioned. This one isn't my favorite, sadly. When I first turned it on, I could definitely hear the influences of Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, Duane Eddy, Eddie Cochran especially. But it's just a little too clean and pristine for me. It's interesting that there was another rockabilly revival song on the chart, though, on your chart. Rocky Burnett's Tired of Towing the Line, which I thought was kind of a cool song. That dropped from 7 to 10, basically just switching places with the Kingbees.
Now, I remember this being a much bigger phenomenon in the UK than in Canada at the time. But as, that record review that I just, mentioned, North America would fall hard the next year when the, Stray Cats took off with Rock This Town and Stray Cat Strut. But getting back to Rocky Burnett's Tired of Towing the Line, I love that song. I don't know, maybe there was an echo to it, at certain parts, which just sort of this is cool. And it hit number 2 on London's CJBK radio chart, number 4 in Canada, and number 8 on Billboard. So it was very popular over here. And I'm sure if you were to talk to somebody from England, today and talk about, Rocky Burnett, I'm sure he had a whole pile of other songs. There was another guy around the same time called Shaking Stevens. And again, I remember he had some sort of random song that was kind of big over here, but over in the UK, this thing just took off. We sort of got little waves of it, but it didn't really catch on like it did over there.
So, I mean, if you started this chart even just a few weeks earlier, you think Tired of Towing the Line would have been a bit higher in your top 15?
Again, looking at the CJBK radio charts for July 1980, I think it would have been in the running for a top 3 finish with Billy Joel's It's Still Rock and Roll to Me and Jay Giles' classic Love Stinks, rounding out, the other top positions.
Before we go any further, let's recap the bottom half of the top 15 singles chart. So Cars, which I'm surprised is that low, by Gary Numan, Hot Rod Hearts by Robbie Dupree, All Out of Love by Air Supply, Brass in Pocket by The Pretenders, great song, Steal Away, Robbie Dupree, another song by Robbie Dupree, and Tired of Towing the Line. Now, who is Robbie Dupree and why does he have 2 songs?
Again, very interesting backstory. Now, like you asked earlier about if the Rocky Burnett song would have been higher if I would have started my chart, say, in January instead of, the end of August. I'm pretty sure that both Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts by Robbie Dupree would have been near the top of the singles charts. There was and is, I don't know, there's just something calm and pleasant sounding about each song. They really are a snapshot of that era of singer-songwriter. Just it was just an easygoing melody, nothing offensive, nothing. It was very, what am I looking for? Not even middle of the road. I guess it is sort of middle of the road. Today, you would find both of those songs on any respectable yacht rock music playlist. And really, the crazy thing, I just learned about Dupree's debut single, the song Steal Away, is upon its release, it was negatively referred to as a blatant ripoff of one of the Doobie Brothers' biggest songs, What a Fool Believes, written in 1979 by Michael McDonald and Kenny Loggins. Now, that song went on to win Grammy Awards for both Song of the Year and Record of the Year.
When listening to both songs today, you can hear the similarities in Dupree's vocal style, the keyboards and even the background vocals. They sound exactly like Michael McDonald. I guess if you're going to plagiarize a song, it may as well be a former Song of the Year.
Song and Record of the Year. So apparently the Grammys, they didn't care about any kind of controversy because in 1981, they nominated Robbie Dupree as Best New Artist, but he lost to Christopher Cross, who, incidentally, had Michael McDonald do backup vocals on his first huge single, Ride Like the Wind. Now, unfortunately, Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts would be Robbie's only North American hits, although he literally continues to tour to this day, and I believe he's like a big hit over in Europe and Asia. And he's had this career for 40 years, but everybody knows him for basically these two songs. Now, as for Christopher Cross winning 5 Grammys in 1980, that will no doubt be a topic of discussion on a future show.
So just going back to the bottom half of the top 15 here, what was the deal with Cars by Gary Numan at 15, dropping 2 spots from the previous week? It was a top 5 hit in Canada for 2 weeks in May. Would it have gone that high in your charts?
If you've never heard Cars, please, after the show, or just pause us now and find this song and listen to it. It's fantastic. It's a very strange synth-based song with electronic claps and a very new wave video. And I was just listening to it recently, and I discovered it runs 4 minutes long, but the last 2.5 minutes is basically an instrumental of odd synthesizer music that just builds and builds and builds as it goes along. Now, this was something very different from everything else on the radio, Jason. Gary Numan was a bit of a pioneer in that regard and continues to make music today. The song Cars entered the local CJBK charts on March the 6th, and I was a huge fan of it, which means by the time chart number 2 was published in August, the song would have been on the charts for 26 weeks or half a year if I've done my math right. And if that was the case, it would have been the longest running song in my top 15 for the entire 2-year run of me creating charts, which is just crazy. Now, as far as would the song have got higher than 15 or where would it have ended up on my charts, I think it probably would have been the number 1 song on my turntable earlier in the year. Its competition would have been Blondie's Call Me and the aforementioned Ride Like the Wind by Christopher Cross. Now, also in the news recently, in 2021, Gary Numan was in the news telling a UK government committee into the economics of music streaming that he had 1 million plays / streams for one of his songs, which I presume was Cars, and was paid £37 or about $65 Canadian for all of that streaming, which is just crazy.
Streaming services paying artists could be a whole nother podcast. I use Tidal. It pays artists the best. Check out the Music Virgins No More playlist that I have made on Tidal. Now back to the chart. Let's check out singles 4 through 9. Starting with number 9, Magic by Olivia Newton-John. Shining Star by the Manhattans. My Mistake by the Kingbees. Take a Little Rhythm, Allie Thompson. Clones, which is a great song by Alice Cooper. And Emotional Rescue by the Rolling Stones, which I think the first time I listened to it, didn't realize it was the Stones until about 2 minutes and 40 seconds into the song, when all of a sudden he drops that falsetto that he's singing, and all of a sudden you hear Mick Jagger. which was really interesting that they, changed their sound so much compared to the rest of their, normal rockers.
So, Jason, when you look at these songs and artists, you can see just how crazy AM radio was back then. Here you have the Rolling Stones, they're doing a disco theme song. You have fellow 1970s shock rocker Alice Cooper trying to stay hip in the new wave era. You have Olivia Newton-John continuing her post-Grease success with a hit single from her much maligned movie Xanadu. You have the soulful R&B group the Manhattans having their biggest song since 1976's Kiss and Say Goodbye, which is honestly one of my favorite songs of all time. And finally, newcomer Ali Thompson, who is the brother of Dougie Thompson, who is the bassist of Supertramp and soon to be a one-hit wonder, had another one of my favorite songs at the time. Now, today, every one of these songs would be played on a different dedicated station on Spotify or, Tidal or Apple. Instead of you hearing them all at once, one after the other on the same station, which really was the norm of the late 70s and early 80s. And a lot of people, these days they don't get that you could have listened to every one of these songs. That could have been 9 songs in a row, and every single one of them had a different genre, which was, crazy. Today, everything is like, oh, I'm just going to listen to pop. Oh, I'm just going to listen to this. I'm just going to listen to that. This way, back then, everything was amalgamated. Everything was music, Jason. If it was good music, it was played on the radio, and it didn't matter who was singing it. Dolly Parton in a few weeks will, be on this chart along with, the Stone could be on the, with the Stones and Alice Cooper and Springsteen and whoever else, Journey. But that's just the way it was at the time, which was, I think, really cool back in the day.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing I noticed when I started, making these playlists based on your charts and listening through, was that they were so varied. And like you said, you don't get that now, even on broadcast radio, let alone Spotify and everything. Like everything is so homogenized and genre specific. There was no barriers with the music you were listening to at the time. If it was good, it was good. Now, I don't necessarily agree with what you considered good at the time, but you were 14. It's okay. Yeah.
I was 14. And, I was young.
The other little side note I wanted to say is, if you haven't heard Dougie Thompson play bass in Supertramp, I mean, he's one of my top 5 bass players of all time. He's just incredible. Okay, so that brings us to our top 3 singles of the week. We got Play the Game by Queen, which is still number 1 for a second week. All Night Long by Joe Walsh, killer guitar riff. And then Coming Up by Paul McCartney and Wings, the live version specifically.
Yeah, it's the live version. We discussed the difference between the live version and the studio version in a later episode. Now, for comparison, so my number 1 for the second week in a row was Play the Game by Queen. So for comparison purposes, for the same week, London CJBK and Canada's RPM magazine, which is basically our version of the States Billboard magazine, had Emotional Rescue at number 1, while Billboard had Christopher Cross's Sailing in the top spot. So, Jason, after listening to all of this week's top 15 singles that I put together many, many years ago, what would be your top 5 songs? And from a sound engineer's standpoint, were there any musical surprises for you?
Yes, I've been looking forward to this. Okay, so Cars, you called it a very strange song. I would call it a creative and adventurous approach to production, and it kind of set the standard for a lot of production to come in the 80s. The song heavily relies on the use of the Mini Moog synth for the bass line, doubling the electric bass, and the Poly Moog, which is the lead synth line.
I didn't know there was different Moogs. I just thought it was a Moog. I didn't know there was a Mini and a Poly. I learned something. This is good.
Yeah, and there's quite a few more, and they made a huge comeback in the early 2000s. They're pretty neat. Okay, so even his vocal performance kind of sounds like it's synthesized with his very short cutoffs, and at points the vocal is doubled. So it all sounded synthesized. And And like I said, that's kind of how things were going. This is 1980. This is the beginning of the synth era. Next, Brass in Pocket. What a great song. Cashbox Magazine wrote that this song shows that Chrissie Hynde was quickly emerging as a bright new singer and stylist, and I couldn't agree more. This song has a mood and a style that's set in stone throughout the song. She really set the tone.
Yeah, and really set the tone for the rest of the Pretenders' debut album, which really sort of came out of nowhere. Like, she had been around for quite a while, but this is her first band, and they just, it's one of those things where in the 80s there are certain bands that sort of made, they were making different music. It was just, there was an attitude about her, and there's an attitude for her for the next 10 years of Pretenders music and all the drama and heartache of her bandmates. But really, Brass in Pocket was, again, something just like Cars. You hadn't heard it on the radio before, and it perked your ears up and go, what is this? Who is this? And it was all of her attitude, but she had the musical chops behind it and the band behind her to, keep people listening for years and years afterwards.
And it's so individual and stylized, and like you said, it's kind of set the tone for the rest of their music. I kind of equate it to David Bowie. He was very stylized. He was very himself, and I think Brass in Pocket kind of set that standard for them as well. Next, Magic.
Magic.
This song,
That's
yes,
crazy.
by Olivia Newton-John.
Little Olivia Newton-John. She was a sweetheart, and you like her music. Go on. I am really surprised by this.
Okay, well, this surprised me. I mean, I grew up, watching Grease and all that stuff. This song, it gets a gold star for most interesting chord changes of the 1980s, and John Farrar's production. The chord changes are out of left field, but Olivia Newton-John's melody just cuts right through, and some of the effects are great. Similar to Chrissie Hynde, there's just a mood set from the beginning to end. So that one surprised me. Clones. Go ahead.
Oh, and the other thing with Magic, I mean, it came from this horrible movie, but it came from a fantastic soundtrack where on one side was all new Olivia Newton-John songs, and on the other side was all new Electric Light Orchestra, or ELO songs. And like, I read something today that said this is one of the most perfect soundtracks you will ever hear. And I'm like, okay, but it's from a horrible movie, so a horrible movie means the soundtrack didn't do very well. But Olivia Newton-John, coming up, her and her producer there, they put together a little song called Physical, or Let's Get Physical.
That did okay, didn't it?
It did fairly well. We'll discuss that in another episode.
Great. Well, okay, next is Clones. Now, I mentioned last episode that I loved the lyrics and concept of the song. And to go along with the futuristic and robotic theme, it's solidified with the use of the now famous Roland drum machine, the CR-78.
Oh yeah, that was a good one. I love that machine. That was the best.
That drum machine was used on so many hits, and it has such a distinct sound. For years you could buy them at flea markets for $20 or something if you found them working.
Right.
But now you look on Kijiji or on eBay, they're selling for thousands of dollars. And we've got all these emulators that can do the sounds perfectly, but nothing quite sounds like a CR-78. It was very cool, and it really helped blend that like futuristic new wave sound mixed with his standard rock setup of bass, drums, guitar, and whatever. So that was very cool. And lastly, I've got Play the Game. By now,
I'm sensing a theme here, Jason, about production and synthesizers. What kind of synthesizer was this one?
This was the Oberheim OBX, which was a very popular synthesizer in the late 70s, early 80s. They were huge. They were heavy. Stevie Wonder was obsessed with them, and it was just used like the first half of the 80s on everything. And this song in general, like, I love Queen, but this song is just larger than life, and it's perfected, by our studio geniuses, Queen. And it also marked the end of their no synth policy. I don't know if you knew that, but in the early 70s, Yeah, in the early 70s, everybody was starting to throw, layers of synths on, and Queen just hard no, we're not using synthesizers. And then they used it on this, and the rest of their career was just
They
syrupy,
never turned
loaded
back.
up.
I'm not sure if
Never turned back.
I'm never sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. To me, I was listening a couple days ago to Van Halen's 1984, album, and again, it's like I like the album, but that was the album that Eddie Van Halen decided to start, showing off his keyboard and synth skills, which, he was a prodigy. Him and his brother were prodigies, musical prodigies. Legitimately, he could have been a concert pianist. But on that album with, Jump and Panama and everything, it's all synths, and you're just like, wow, all of a sudden it is Van Halen, but it's not Van Halen. And I find the same thing with The Game. It's like if you listen to all their albums leading up to The Game, it's one thing. And then from The Game, if you disregard Crazy Little Thing Called Love, which came out about 6 months before the album came out because they weren't finished it, it's a completely different Queen from that, from that point on. And their next album after this was one that people are still debating today. So.
Okay, now that was my 5, but I'm going to give a special mention to Joe Walsh's guitar riff on All Night Long. I mean, it's kind of the best of every AC/DC guitar riff and every other pop rock guitar riff ever put into one, and it's just really good.
It is. He knows how to do a guitar riff. Like his solo stuff is amazing. His stuff that he did with the Eagles on Hotel California. I mean, him coming into the Eagles sort of solidified them, and then they had the biggest success and they couldn't handle it. So and then he had an up and down career after that. But yeah, I mean, Joe Walsh is just, I mean, he's amazing.
I mean, a big up in his career was his regular occurrence on the Drew Carey Show for a couple of seasons. But
because you're like, is that Drew? Is that Joe Walsh on? Why is he here? Like, but yeah.
Well, he auditions for Drew's band.
No, I know, and it was just funny. Like I remember watching that, going, I think that's Joe Walsh. Like I'm looking around the room, going, anybody? No. You would have known him for sure, but that was 20 years ago. I'm not. We would have just met. So, but you would have known who Joe Walsh was at the time.
Oh, for sure. Oh yeah.
Okay, so now we've reached your favorite part of the podcast when you get to ask me one specific question, or maybe two, about a song or songs on my list. I don't know the topic in advance, so here's your chance, Jason. What is your question?
Well, this is the what the hell were you thinking, John? Question. And there's actually 2 for this episode. I'm only supposed to pick one, but Shining Star and Hot Rod Hearts. Now, don't get upset. What were you thinking, John? Hot Rod Hearts. This song had to be considered cheesy as hell, even at the time, right? And Shining Star? Hold on. And Shining Star, did you have a crush on a girl or something? Because the intro bass line is Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. And do you know how many times they use the word baby in this song? 9. In the radio version, there's 9. And there's no official lyrics posted for the album version, but I think I counted 13 or more.
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Hot Rod Hearts, I mean, again, this Robbie Dupree was, if you listen to the Doobie Brothers and Michael McDonald at the time, it is really very similar as far as a tone and a feel to it. And I just liked it for whatever reason. I like Steal Away, and this just had, it's a storyline about a girl and hot rods and, making out, I think. It was a good song. As far as Shining Star, again, I mean, these guys were classic, but I didn't know who they were at the time. It was just a song on the radio that, these guys are singing great harmonies, honey, you are my shining star.
Oh, guys, we've gotten to the part of the podcast where John starts singing.
I apologize. Please come back. Please come back. I say I'm not going to do that again. But Shining Star was it's a great song. It just is. And it's a timeless song. You could just listen to that any day of the week.
You use the word timeless. I use the word dated. But anyway, let's
Dated?
move on to.
No, are you saying that that's dated?
Yes.
I don't know. It's at the time, maybe it was kind of a comeback for them because they had been around in the 70s, and then this song came out. For whatever reason, it was like ear candy, to my young virgin ears. So I liked it, and maybe that's what Hot Rod Hearts was too. So
all right. Okay, and this brings us to our final topic of the day, final lyric of the week. John, what song did you pick?
It's from your favorite song this week, basically. Joe Walsh's All Night Long from the Urban Cowboys soundtrack. And the line is, "We keep on grinning till the weekend comes, just a pinch between your cheek and gums." It's poetry. Plus you have his guitar riff there. Okay, so what is, now I might have stolen your line, but what is your favorite lyric of the week?
Okay, well, I alluded to this before, and you kind of dodged the question, but you must have had a crush at the time, because with the exception of Clones and its conceptual lyrics and imagery, and then Cars, every other song here is about love and longing. So I just left all that cheese behind, and I'm going to go with Cars. Here in my car, I feel the safest of all. I can lock all of my doors. It's the only way to live in cars. I've recently gotten my own vehicle for the first time. So it's a new and fresh feeling for me, and I can really relate to the feeling of being in an entirely different world when you're in your car. Your music's on. You swear at people when you normally wouldn't if they just cut you off. You're in a completely different world. You're in your own space. So I related to that, and that surprised me as well, because at first glance, those lyrics just seem sort of cheesy and not fully thought out. But after listening a couple times, I went, well, no. I mean, people spend so much time of their life in their car, and it really is your own world. And I thought that was pretty neat.
Right, and especially if you've lived in the Toronto area, or you live in a giant metropolis area where you're in your car becomes part of your evening and your morning. Like a morning commute, into Toronto might take you an hour and a half every day in, and an hour and a half back. So you got to find something to do, and during that time, it usually is, unless you're carpooling. But I mean, this is your space to do whatever. I mean, back in the 80s, people probably, you had AM radio playing, and that was it. I mean, today you would have a podcast playing. You would have audiobooks going. So being in a car by yourself, it was kind of your own alone time until you get home, and then the kids rush you and it's time for dinner, and you got to go to baseball practice. You got to drop them off somewhere, or life just gets very busy as soon as you get into the driveway. But up until that point, the safest, you can lock all your doors. It's the only way to live in cars. It's true. And Winnebagos are probably more comfortable.
Probably, yeah.
So that concludes our review for chart number 2 of 106 for the week ending August 30th, 1980. Now be sure to like and follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, where you'll find relevant pictures, information, and, of course, pictures of the actual typewritten chart to review and debate among yourselves, family, and friends.
Okay, and feel free to give us your comments about the show and leave comments about the songs you loved in the early 80s. We'd love to hear from you.
Now be sure to check us out next week when a new single debuts that will have Jason questioning my sanity and his commitment to the podcast going forward. Until then, keep rocking like there's no tomorrow, and thanks for listening.
The Music Virgins No More podcast was recorded in Amherstburg, Ontario and Lloydminster, Alberta.